Below in the description, you'll find the little notes I'm looking at and a lot of memory and some practicality. I'm going to read literally the text of what will be below. There's a lot of links here, even by my standards, to source material. But here we go. The 13-inch bullet drop kill zone. The maximum point-blank range idea or meme. Flat trajectory, or point of aim and point of impact being the same or indistinguishable, except at the target. Zeroed shooting. I'll give an opinion after just reading exactly what you have in the description below. A 30-06 military cartridge designed in 1906 when shots at 1,000 yards or 914 meters were expected to kill a military target versus 1,000 foot-pound of energy max effective range for any particular hunting cartridge. A deer or a zombie hit with 1,000 foot-pounds of energy to guarantee a kill if you hit the vital area at all, or a high likelihood of it, was 860 yards. But to kill an elk or a moose, 1,500 foot-pounds of energy, or overkill range for your zombie target, was 620 yards. But it doesn't matter if you can't hit the target. And at the time, and even today, iron sights, which was the standard in the military and also for hunting, in fact, mandated is now a new t-shirt. They made it to where you had to use iron sights, which meant the blade of your iron sight ran into the same problem that caused the AR-15 to be desirable. It didn't matter how long a distance the bullet would be lethal at for any particular game. It mattered whether or not you could hit it by aiming. If you put your thumb outstretched really, really far, you get a dot that's approximately the same size as, a little bit smaller than the moon or the sun. That's a pretty big damn target. Either of them. One is substantially further away and is a bigger target, but it's the same. You're covering up your target so you can't see it. And that brings up the next problem. If you get a scope or your firearm set, at some range, the bullet impact, the point of impact, is going to be below where the barrel edge is, or the zero altitude above barrel. Point blank, or point zero. For a cannon, everything below that line should be too far away for you to hit accurately, due to windage or slop or something, right? But at what distance do you have where the amount of shots you fire, even if you change brand of cartridge, as long as they fit the gun, will they hit in a range that would be small enough? It doesn't matter if you hit perfectly. That's a small range. That'll work. Versus it's too big of a spread. It doesn't matter if I aim accurately with a scope. I'm going to hit outside the scope range. If you can zoom it in enough, you should be able to hit anything. Well, no, you're going to have variations due to wind and cartridges, unless you weigh every cartridge. Now, if you weigh every cartridge and do an idealized experiment where you bolt the thing in a vise like you're supposed to, what's the maximum range where all of the bullets from one brand in one box with exactly the same weight will hit almost the same spot within a 6-inch cluster? That should be your max range because deer, elk, moose, and humans, you don't want it bigger than a foot, so make it half that. Okay? Okay. Also, there's a bullet drop, depending on how much propellant, off by one little grain, literally the grain, little fleck, could cause it to have a variation of 6 inches. So you do that so that you make a gun and you find out what's its practical range. Remember, a bullet is still lethal far beyond any range you could actually do the job of hitting it and killing something. And then we bring in the seemingly underpowered cartridges that really do hit with enough force, lethal force, but only enough, at the range you can hit at with iron sights, which was the ideal behind using a varmint round, 223, 5.56, to do the job. Now, I'm going to bring up a little known, recognized fact, full 30 on this. The 30 caliber range of bullets here, which they're not all 30 calibers, but they almost are, is a sweet spot by making a proper rifle bullet shape and mass and having it 30 caliber at that range. You end up with this sweet spot where if you try to do smaller or bigger bullets, you don't get the range, you don't get the reliability, you don't get the consistency, and more importantly, because of the chamber constraints, you don't force every company to basically make the same cartridge, which means it doesn't matter if you get a 30-06 cartridge from one company or another, cheap or expensive. As long as you weigh them, they'll have the same consistent output. That's something I learned about a long time ago. You can take it for granted that I'm wrong. Please do. Go and test this. And yeah, if you get two cartridges from different companies and they have the same weight and hit the same spot, they're the same cartridge. Probably. The amount of matter in the cartridge, in grain weight, not volume, volumetric grains is stupid. Don't do that. You end up with them hitting about the same spot if the gun is made to accommodate for whatever you feed it and the cartridges are not complete crap. Bow and arrow, slingshot, paintball, pellet gun. With the exception of the aerodynamic effects, which you can use to completely eliminate the arcing over effect to where it will literally fly dead flat, paintball, and plastic PB gun, airsoft? Yeah, by doing backspin on it. The Magnuson effect or whatever? I forget what it's called. Where you use a tip-up. The barrel, without any rifling, will get an almost perfectly flat trajectory because air currents are dominant sometimes. In a vacuum on the moon, you'll get an arc that's supposed to be a parabola. In air, you're going to get it muting it and altering it and even enhancing it to where it's not even an arc anymore. And then it'll go thoink and drop to the ground. The maximum effective energy level. Elk, 1,500 foot-pounds of energy, maximum range for all the 30 calibers that you can look up. According to every hunting page I could find, rounds off to 620 yards. It's 860 yards to hit a deer with lethal force at 1,000 foot-pounds. Or a zombie. When they say deer range, that should be implied we're talking about our two-legged zombie land stuff. Okay? That's what we have to say, zombies. But what's the range with all of them that shows up on a practical level using every barrel and every gun and every test system that works out to be the sweet spot where you get the least amount of variation in the shots hitting? And keep it down to what's the maximum size you could tolerate to accurately hit a target with plenty of force, 1,000 foot-pounds, 1,500 foot-pounds. It's obviously more than that because it's a lot further than What's the group size? What's the drop? How much drop? What's going on here? 6 inches. 6 inches. Let's use that number. 6-inch drop, total drop distance, if you do a proper long-range, flat trajectory zeroing where it goes up and down. The maximum range of up versus down, if you do it right, is 3 inches too high or 3 inches too low if you aim at the target. And the further away it is, it'll still be 3 inches, but you won't be able to see a difference. It'll look like it hit exactly where you aimed. What's that range? 300 yards. It's actually 318 yards or 290 meters or exactly 300 meters and some number of yards. It doesn't matter. Just pick whichever number you want to use. I don't care if you're European or American or god-awful French. Between the main popular hunting cartridges by quote-unquote cartridge or caliber chambering. Most of them use almost the same bullet entirely. I mean, they're almost the same. The grain weight affects it heavily. But the aerodynamics, which is affected by the shape, and a bunch of other characteristics, it ends up being a 300-yard shot with a 6-inch maximum difference in positioning. At that point, you can negate buying the expensive or the cheap or worrying about it, or worrying about fine-tuning it. What you need to do is tune how you aim it. If you aim it flat, the bullet will always go from the barrel and drop immediately. Most ballistic charts show it being tipped up ever so slightly for whatever reason, but they don't do the real thing of pointing it up to where when you fire the bullet, if you use this as your line of sight, not this, but this, from barrel to impact point at practical max range with a 6-inch group at 300 yards, not 250, as your zero, meaning the straight line, how far up does it go? 6 inches. Okay, Now, what if you make it to where on purpose you make it hit an indiscernibly tiny distance of 3 inches here, so the maximum too high of a hit is 3, which means you're 3 inches up or 3 inches down, no matter where you are, over a 300-yard distance, 3 football fields, of hitting the target. Perfectly. It's worst-case scenario 3-inch group along that line. It's a simple equation, simple zeroing. Zeroing at 300 yards, and then deliberately changing your zero by a tiny amount for the long range that has a major effect on the short range, so your deviation is literally this far too high or this far too low, aiming at your target, that's your zombie. From the scope or iron sights, peep sights, adjusted point of aim with the most common bullet weight for a cartridge, max distance point of impact, less deviation than 6 inches total, 3 inch up, 3 inch down. When you go hunting with a bow and arrow, slingshot, or whatever, or if you're just shooting targets, when you're just plinking around, you start noticing a practical limitation. Now, we're going to talk about places where people are poor. Places where people are poor, regulating whether or not you get 1 or 2 deer a year. Those are poachers. It's not that they're poor and that's their only source of food. We've declared that this is sport shooting only. Meanwhile, they switch over to shooting things you don't care about and eat them. The practicality requirement is that they be able to hit what they're aiming at without having to work too hard at it. Oh, I need to buy the $2,000 rifle with the pseudo autofocus where I have to crank things perfectly, accounting for windage, or what's the practical limit of your ability to shoot? Don't bother shooting farther than that. Make it to where it'll work without the scope, or if you use the scope, the top of the arch is at the top of your round scope reticle, and the bottom is down here at the maximum range, and you aim here because that's a 3-inch window along the range. Even if it's showing a big difference, you're still doing a 3-inch window within your scoped range because you zoom it back out. The .30-06 military cartridge was designed in 1906 when shots at 1,000 yards were expected to kill a target human. They'd fire them in volleys of 5 or 6, or fire a 4 or 5 round burst and aim at a target and hope the damn thing didn't move because that was actually machine gun firing .30-06 cartridges, but you get the idea. Now we get to the cartridges selected by people who hunt, who determined that they could get 6-inch groups or 6-inch deviation if they did this long-range zeroing. Point blank does not mean close unless it's a pistol or something with a really shitty set of performance characteristics. Point blank is short range, only in pistols. And shotguns, well, with a slug, no, it's not short range either. Point blank is from the muzzle all the way out to whatever the max range is that you call point blank. If you zero it this way and you get no more deviation 3-inch high or 3-inch low, as long as you're not really close range where that would make a difference, that's good enough for shooting most things. Anything smaller than a foot across, like a rabbit or whatever, not good enough. Obviously, you'd have to do a better job. But if you're shooting moose, elk, deer, zombies, you can do 3 football fields of distance. Let's bring up black powder weapons shooting Manet balls that were muzzle loaded. Three football fields away. It's the same thing. This is not new. What you do is, again, if you're a practical shooter, aka I'm trying to get some food, you make it to where it hits the spot at 300 yards, and then you see how high it goes by putting sticks back while it's in a vise. And if it goes no higher than 3 inches and no lower than 3 inches over the entire track, that's good enough. And you find out where it hits exactly 3 inches higher than where you're aiming if you can figure that out in the field, and that becomes your 0 point, and you set your scope to that. That way your 0 point for the scope is below the highest point and above the lowest point. 7mm Remington Magnum, 338 Remington Ultra Magnum, 300 Remington Ultra Magnum, the 300 Winchester Short Magnum, and 300 Winchester Magnum full-on, based on the 375 H&M Magnum and the 404 Jeffries for most of these cartridges, have become so standardized that they're almost interchangeable, except the chamber's different. Did you spend $2,000 on a rifle that really you could replace with something that was thrown away in 1910? Hype versus how to aim. Every person out there harvesting food that isn't a sports shooter just twice a year had figured this out a long time ago. Same thing with bow hunters for centuries. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck.